back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're digging into something a lot of you have been asking about: Novo Nordisk's annual report for 2024.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating read, actually.
It's not just your typical dry financial report, though. We've got groundbreaking research, ambitious sustainability goals. It's really a window into the future of healthcare. What were your initial impressions? Anything jump out at you right away?
Well, their adoption of the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, that's a pretty big deal.
Okay, that's their first year using it, right? So they're upping the transparency game. But what does all that actually mean, though, for, say, the average person just interested in their work?
Well, you can think of it as like a deeper level of accountability. Like the CSRD, it demands way more detail about how a company is impacting the environment, how it's impacting society. And Novo Nordisk is basically opening their books, Anyone can see.
So it's really setting a new standard for transparency in the pharmaceutical world.
You could say that, yeah. It's not just about the bottom line anymore. It's about how you get there. And they're reaching a lot of people with their products. Over 45 million, actually, according to the report. And their commitment to diabetes research. I mean, that really jumps out at you. They've got that, 100-year history in insulin production, right?
It's a legacy. But they're not resting on their laurels.
Not at all. Like, take the launch of Wegovy, the world's first once-weekly basal insulin. It could be a real game changer for patients managing their diabetes.
So walk me through that a bit. Why is a once-weekly insulin such a big deal?
Well, imagine you're someone dealing with daily injections. Suddenly you only have to do it once a week. I mean, that could drastically improve their quality of life.
Yeah, that makes sense. Less disruption to your routine, potentially better adherence to the treatment plan. Just think about the reduced burden, right? Constantly managing supplies and schedules.
Exactly.
But they're also talking about a glucose-sensitive insulin in development. I mean, that almost sounds like science fiction.
It's true. It is still in early trials. But think about it, an insulin that automatically adjusts to your body's needs in real time.
No more constant monitoring. No more manual adjustments.
Right. If they can pull this off, it'd be revolutionary.
It makes you wonder what other impossible treatments might be just around the corner. They're even looking at DNA immunotherapy, right? Like to potentially retrain the immune system in type 1 diabetes.
Yeah, the ambition of their research is pretty striking. But it's not just diabetes. They're framing obesity as this global health crisis. And their approach is really interesting.
How so? What's different about their take on it?
They're not just talking about weight loss, it's about the big picture.
Yeah.
Metabolic health, cardiovascular risk, overall well-being. And their drug, CagriSema, which is in phase 3 development right now, it's showing a lot of promise.
They're seeing some impressive results in their trials.
Yeah, their amycretin trial actually showed an estimated 22% average weight loss, and this is over 36 weeks. So it's a combination of an amylin analog and a GLP-1 receptor agonist once a week, really pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with weight management medication.
It makes you wonder if this could actually change the way we approach obesity treatment as a society.
It definitely raises a lot of important questions about how we define and address this whole health challenge.
Now, they're also doing work in cardiovascular disease, which, of course, is one of the world's biggest killers. What's their main focus there?
They're focused on ziltivekimab, which targets systemic inflammation. It's a key driver of cardiovascular problems.
So if it's successful, could that be the first treatment to really target that underlying inflammation instead of just managing the symptoms?
That's the hope, yeah. Could be a huge benefit for high-risk patients who don't respond to current therapies.
So they're working on a lot of different health challenges, but they also mentioned work in rare diseases too, right?
Right. They're focusing on hemophilia and hemoglobinopathies.
And what's their approach there?
They're really pushing the boundaries with technology, using things like gene editing for hemophilia A and exploring new therapies like Bagsværd for sickle cell disease.
It sounds like they're really committed to pushing the boundaries of medical innovation overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But let's not forget, they are a business. So let's take a look at their financial performance. What are the key takeaways there?
Right. Can't ignore the numbers. Give us the highlights.
Okay, they're reporting 25.1% growth in operating profit, with significant increases in EBITDA. Their sales for those popular GLP-1 drugs, like Ozempic and Rybelsus, are also way up.
Although they did mention some supply constraints, right?
Yeah.
Probably because of that high demand we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have, I guess. But it shows the challenge of keeping up with the need for these innovative treatments. They're going to have to manage their supply chain very carefully.
And how about their dividend policy? How are they sharing the wealth with their shareholders?
They're continuing their commitment to return value to shareholders. The total dividend for 2024 was 11.40 feet, Danish kroner per share, keeping a payout ratio of 50.2%.
So doing well financially, investing heavily in research and expanding into new areas. But are they only focused on that growth and profit, or are they thinking about the bigger picture too?
Well, they do acknowledge the potential risks and challenges that come with operating in the pharmaceutical world.
Such as? What are some of the bumps in the road they might encounter?
Well, first of all, research and development are inherently unpredictable. Not every promising drug candidate is going to make it through clinical trials. And then you've got external factors to consider, like geopolitical instability and increasing market competition, things like that.
So they're not pretending those uncertainties don't exist.
No, they're not. They emphasize their commitment to product quality, patient safety, and ethical business practices. They have a comprehensive risk management approach to address those challenges.
It sounds like they're taking a measured and responsible approach to growth. But it's not just about the bottom line for them, right? They also seem to care about their employees quite a bit.
Yeah, employee well-being is definitely a key focus for them, especially when it comes to addressing workplace stress levels, which, let's face it, can be a big problem in this kind of fast-paced industry.
And how are they trying to address that?
They actually set a target to reduce the number of employees reporting stress symptoms by 10% each year.
So they're actually putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to employee well-being, not just throwing money at R&D, but thinking about the human side of things too.
Yeah, exactly. Although they do admit they missed that target in 2024, which they say is due to the rapid growth and all the changes that come with it.
I like that honesty. They're not shying away from acknowledging their shortcomings.
And they're actively working to improve.
Seems like they're actually trying to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to their commitment to creating a sustainable work environment, which ultimately benefits everybody, their employees, the company itself, and the patients they serve.
So far, we've covered a lot of ground. Their research, their commitment to various disease areas. What are your initial overall thoughts about Novo Nordisk? What's the big takeaway?
I'd say it's their long-term vision. They're not just thinking about profits, They're thinking about how their work is going to fundamentally reshape healthcare in the years to come.
Yeah, I see that in their strategic aspirations for 2025. What are some of their goals? Can you give us a glimpse?
Okay, so they're aiming to strengthen their leadership in diabetes, shooting for a global value market share of over 1/3.
That's a pretty ambitious goal.
They're thinking big. They're also projecting over 25 billion Danish kroners in obesity care sales, which shows how confident they are in the growth of that area. And they also want sustained growth in their rare disease portfolio and to establish a major presence in cardiovascular and emerging therapy areas.
They're not thinking small, are they?
Not at all.
It's fascinating to see how they're balancing that financial success with a real commitment to sustainability and tackling these big global health issues. Anything else stand out to you?
Yeah, their emphasis on prevention is encouraging. They're not just about treating diseases after they develop, but about creating a healthier world to prevent them in the first place.
Right, like their Cities for Better Health initiative.
Yeah, and their work on childhood obesity prevention.
They're getting to the root causes, not just treating the symptoms.
Exactly. It's that holistic, long-term approach that I find really inspiring.
So we've got this picture of innovation, scientific breakthroughs, commercial success, and a genuine commitment to making a real difference in the world. What's next? Where do we go from here?
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How will their future innovations reshape not just treatment, but our whole way of thinking about health itself?
That's the question, isn't it? And it feels like we've only scratched the surface here. If you're listening and you want to dive deeper into Novo Nordisk's work, check out the full annual report on their website. There's a lot more to explore.
You can find all the detailed financials, their full sustainability report, and tons of information about their research and initiatives.
We'll be back soon for part 2 of this deep dive. We'll be taking a much closer look at those sustainability initiatives, so stay tuned.
Welcome back. Ready to dig deeper into Novo Nordisk's approach to sustainability?
Let's do it. One thing that really struck me is that they're going beyond just financial numbers to measure their impact. Like, they've got all these specific key performance indicators or KPIs.
Tracking everything.
Pretty much. From CO2 emissions to plastic use, even employee well-being. It's refreshing to see a company putting hard numbers on their sustainability efforts.
Yeah, it's a good sign they're serious about accountability.
Yeah.
So let's break it down a bit. How are they actually doing on those environmental goals?
Okay, well, let's start with their carbon footprint. They've set a goal of zero CO2 emissions from their operations by 2030.
That's ambitious.
It is, especially for a global company with all those complex manufacturing processes.
And they're aiming to be completely carbon neutral across their entire value chain by 2045, right?
Yeah.
So that's not just their own operations, it's everything.
The big picture. So how are they going to get there? What are they actually doing?
Well, they're putting a lot of money into renewable energy, like transitioning their production facilities to run on wind and solar power.
That's a good start. But what about all the other emissions that come with a global business? Transportation, packaging, everything.
They're working on it. Reducing waste across the board, both in what they do and by partnering with suppliers to lower emissions throughout their supply chain.
So it really is about those ripple effects, huh? Sustainability isn't just what you do inside your own company, it's about your whole network. Now, what about plastic? That's a big one for the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, for sure. And Novo Nordisk knows that. They've set a goal to cut down the amount of plastic used per patient by 30% by 2033.
That's a pretty significant reduction. How are they planning to do that? Is it just swapping plastic for cardboard?
It's more than that. It's a multi-pronged approach, they call it. They're shifting to reusable devices and developing new medicines that don't need to be administered as often, so fewer disposable pens and syringes. They're also exploring lower carbon plastics and sustainable marine fuels for their shipping.
Oh, so less frequent doses would mean fewer of those disposable pens and syringes ending up in landfills.
Exactly. And they've even got a program called ReMed.
ReMed?
Yeah, it's a take-back scheme, so patients can return their used pens and the plastic can be recycled.
Oh, I love that. Closing the loop, keeping those materials in circulation. It's like a circular economy for insulin pens. But it's not just about the planet, right? They're also looking at the social side of sustainability. How are they measuring their impact on people?
Well, a lot of it has to do with patient access to medicines, employee well-being, and ethical business practices.
Right, and we talked about their efforts on childhood obesity and helping those living with rare diseases. So that kind of fits right in with that whole focus on human health.
Yeah, absolutely. They track things like how many people they're reaching with their treatments, especially those in vulnerable populations. And they're committed to diversity and inclusion within their own workforce, like aiming for balanced gender representation at all levels.
So they're looking inward as well as outward. It's good to see that. But with all this, how do we know if it's actually making a difference? How are they measuring if their sustainability initiatives are working?
Well, that's where their double materiality assessment comes in.
Double materiality assessment.
Yeah, it's a framework to identify and evaluate the most important sustainability issues for their business and their stakeholders.
Okay, that sounds a bit like corporate jargon to me. Break that down. What does it really mean?
Okay, so think of it as looking at sustainability from two different perspectives. You've got impact materiality, which is all about how their business affects the world. So the environment, society, the economy.
So like understanding the footprint they're leaving.
Exactly. And then there's financial materiality, which is more about how sustainability issues could impact their business. So their profits, their reputation, their long-term survival, that kind of thing.
So they're assessing both the risks and the opportunities related to sustainability.
Right. By considering both sides, they can figure out what sustainability topics are most crucial for everyone.
I can see how that would help focus their efforts.
And it's not a one-time thing either.
Yeah.
They review and update this assessment every year so they can adapt.
That's good. It's not just a plan set in stone.
Right. They also integrate sustainability into their risk management framework, too.
Ah, that's important, right? It's one thing to have goals. It's another to really make it part of how you operate.
Yeah. So they're identifying and assessing potential risks related to sustainability. Could be financial risks, reputational risks, ethical risks, everything.
Can you give me an example? Like how that works in practice?
Okay, let's say climate change. They know that things like extreme weather could disrupt their supply chain or impact the health and safety of their employees. So they're developing mitigation plans. They're not just focused on reducing their own emissions, but they're preparing for the potential consequences of a changing climate.
So it's a proactive approach to risk management. They're trying to make sure they're prepared for whatever comes next.
Exactly. And they're very transparent about the areas where they're falling short, too.
It's not all perfect, then.
Well, nobody's perfect. Everyone loves a success story, but it's important to acknowledge those challenges.
Absolutely. So what are some of those areas where they're struggling?
They're upfront about the fact that while they've made progress on renewable energy, their overall emissions actually went up in 2024 because of all the growth.
So it's a balancing act, isn't it? Trying to grow while minimizing their impact. What other challenges have they come up against?
They're still having trouble reaching their goal of a 10% reduction in employees reporting stress symptoms. It actually stayed the same in 2024.
So it's a journey, not a destination, right? There are going to be bumps in the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're acknowledging those challenges and working towards improvement.
Transparency is key. Okay, so they're measuring their impact, integrating sustainability into their risk management, being honest about their shortcomings. What are the overarching themes that you see emerging? What are the big trends in their sustainability story?
I'd say one that really stands out is their focus on collaboration. They're partnering with all kinds of organizations like UNICEF, cities, universities, to tackle really complex issues like childhood obesity and urban health.
So they know they can't do it alone. Systemic change needs everyone working together.
Precisely. Another key theme is their long-term thinking. They're not just chasing quick wins. They're making investments and setting targets that are going to shape the future of healthcare.
It's playing the long game, isn't it? Thinking about the impact you want to have on the world, not just next quarter's earnings report.
That's it.
Now, you talked about them integrating sustainability into their risk management. Can you expand on that a bit? How are they figuring out and dealing with those potential sustainability risks?
Okay, so they're using this framework that considers all sorts of potential risks. Could be regulatory risks, legal risks, reputational risks, operational risks, financial risks, you name it.
Give me some examples of how those might play out.
Okay, well, they're really watching those evolving regulations
Mm-hmm.
and ESG standards to make sure they're not running into any legal trouble. They're actively managing their brand reputation so they don't get any negative attention over sustainability stuff.
Reputation is everything for a company like this.
Right. And operationally, they're thinking about the potential impact of climate change. Like, what if the supply chain is disrupted or their facilities are damaged? And financially, they're looking at things like rising energy costs or what if carbon pricing mechanisms are introduced?
So they're trying to cover all the bases.
Yeah, they're not leaving anything to chance. They're really embedding sustainability into their risk management processes so their business is resilient in the long term despite all these global challenges.
So it's not just a feel-good initiative, it's a business imperative. Now let's dive into one of their most important sustainability challenges, climate change. They've got those big goals for reducing their emissions. How are they going to actually achieve those goals?
They've developed a whole transition plan with lots of different strategies like energy efficiency improvements, switching to renewable energy sources, sustainable transportation solutions, and working with their suppliers to reduce emissions throughout their entire value chain.
So they're tackling it from every angle. Give me some concrete actions. What are they actually doing?
They're always working on reducing energy consumption in their operations. Everything from how they design buildings to the equipment they use. They're switching over to renewable sources for electricity like wind power and solar.
What about transportation? That's a big part of global emissions.
Yeah, they're exploring electric vehicles, biofuels, all kinds of sustainable transportation options to reduce those emissions from their fleet and their logistics operations.
So they're trying everything, but are they going it alone or are they looking for partners?
Collaboration is huge for them. They're part of the RE100 initiative, which is a global group of companies that have committed to 100% renewable electricity. And they're working with other pharmaceutical companies to share best practices and help everyone transition to a low-carbon economy.
Makes sense. You can't tackle a global issue like climate change by yourself. Now, we talked about them reducing their carbon footprint. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about reducing their reliance on plastic. We already touched on the REMED take-back scheme. What else are they doing to cut back on their plastic use?
They're tackling plastic waste in several ways. They're trying to reduce the amount of plastic used in their packaging and devices, and they're trying out different materials and designs. They're also transitioning to lower carbon plastics made from recycled or bio-based materials.
So it's more than just recycling. Are they trying to eliminate plastic completely?
Well, they're putting a lot of effort into developing new medicines that don't require as many doses. So fewer injections means fewer disposable pens and syringes. And they're trying to apply circular economy principles, keep materials in use for as long as possible.
A much more sustainable approach. Now, I want to hear more about their water stewardship efforts. They mention a water withdrawal savings program. What is that exactly?
Basically, it's a comprehensive program to reduce water consumption across their operations, especially in their production sites, because that's where they use a lot of water.
So how are they saving water? What are the specifics?
They've got water efficiency projects to optimize water use. They're finding and fixing leaks, and they're implementing technologies to save water. They're even trying to reuse and recycle water within their own operations.
So they're trying to close the loop for water, just like they are with plastic.
Exactly. And they're collaborating with local stakeholders like water utilities and other industries to come up with new water management solutions.
So they're thinking beyond their own company and considering the whole water context.
Right. They're even looking at ways to contribute to water replenishment projects to make sure there's enough water, good quality water, outside of their own sites too.
It's about recognizing that water is a shared resource. We all have to be responsible for it. Now, let's talk about their biodiversity efforts. They mention a nature roadmap. What are they hoping to achieve, and what are they actually doing?
Their big goal is to stop the loss of nature in their value chain by 2033, and they're aiming to become nature positive by 2045.
Nature positive, what does that even mean?
It means having a positive impact on biodiversity overall, not just minimizing harm, but actually helping to restore and regenerate ecosystems.
That's pretty amazing. How are they going to do that?
Their nature roadmap outlines a bunch of actions, like minimizing their own land use, encouraging sustainable land management in their supply chain, and implementing measures to protect and enhance biodiversity on their own sites and in their sourcing areas.
Like, what kind of measures are we talking about?
Things like creating wildlife habitats, planting native species, and restoring damaged ecosystems. It's really about rebuilding and regenerating nature, not just preventing more harm.
So they're looking at the whole ecosystem, not just their little piece of it. And it's great that they're not just focusing on their own direct impact. They're thinking about their supply chain, too.
Right. They're working with their suppliers to promote sustainable practices and make sure the materials they're sourcing aren't contributing to biodiversity loss.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about their environmental sustainability work. Let's move over to the social side. What are some of their key initiatives when it comes to things like employee well-being, diversity and inclusion, and human rights?
Their commitment to their employees is really clear. They've got all kinds of programs to support their physical, mental, and emotional well-being.
Give me some examples. What are some of the programs they have in place?
They offer flexible work arrangements to help employees balance their work and personal life. They have really good health and wellness programs like on-site fitness facilities, healthy food options, and mental health resources.
So it's not just lip service. They're actually putting money into supporting their employees' health and happiness.
Yeah, and they don't stop there. They're really committed to fair and ethical labor practices throughout their whole supply chain.
How do they make sure that happens?
They have a strict supplier code of conduct covering wages, working hours, health and safety, and freedom of association. So they hold their suppliers to the same standards they hold themselves to.
Extending their responsibility outwards, huh? And we talked before about their focus on diversity and inclusion within their own workforce. What are they doing to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace?
They've set targets for gender balance at every level, and they've got programs to attract and keep a diverse group of talent.
So they're realizing that a diverse and inclusive workplace brings a wider range of perspectives and ideas, which is good for everyone.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. They've also got a strong commitment to human rights. They actually developed a human rights policy that guides everything they do, all their business relationships around the world.
What's in that policy?
It covers a lot of ground. Things like freedom of association and collective bargaining, no discrimination, zero tolerance for forced labor and child labor, and they're really big on health and safety for all employees.
So it's a comprehensive approach to human rights, making sure that everyone is treated fairly and with respect.
Right, upholding the highest ethical standards in everything they do.
That's impressive. They're not missing anything. Now let's look at their corporate governance practices. How do they make sure their decision-making is ethical and responsible, especially at the top levels?
They have a really robust corporate governance framework. It's guided by some key principles: transparency, accountability, independence, and integrity.
Okay, solid principles. But how do those actually translate into action?
Well, they're really committed to being open and transparent in how they communicate with shareholders, stakeholders, the public, everybody. And they've got systems in place to make sure they're actually living up to their commitments and holding themselves accountable for the decisions they make.
That's a good foundation. What about independence and integrity?
Well, they have a board of directors, and they're independent, so they provide oversight and guidance to the management team. And they're committed to doing all their business in an ethical way, following all the applicable laws and regulations.
So they're proactive about good governance. They're not just reacting to problems.
Exactly. They understand that good governance builds trust and helps maintain a good reputation.
It makes sense. Can you give me a specific example?
Okay, well, they've got a really strong whistleblower protection policy so that employees can report anything that seems unethical or illegal. And they have a comprehensive anti-corruption program to prevent bribery and stuff like that.
So they're trying to create a culture of ethics and compliance throughout the organization.
Exactly. They're constantly reviewing and improving their corporate governance practices to make sure they're meeting the highest standard.
It's all about continuous improvement, getting better all the time. Now, I'm curious about one aspect of corporate governance: executive compensation. How do they make sure that executive pay is aligned with the company's long-term interests? And that includes sustainability.
It's a good question. Their executive compensation policy is very clear. They link pay to both financial and non-financial performance. So that includes sustainability performance.
So it's not just about profits. There are other things they're taking into account.
Right. They know that sustainability is key to long-term value creation. So they're factoring in environmental performance, like reducing emissions and minimizing waste. Social performance, like promoting diversity and inclusion and improving employee well-being. And governance performance, like strengthening corporate governance practices and making things more transparent.
So the executives have an incentive to make decisions that are good for the company's bottom line and their impact on the world.
Exactly. And the board of directors, they oversee the whole executive compensation program. They have to make sure that everything is aligned with the company's values and long-term strategy. It's a good example of how sustainability is a part of every aspect of corporate governance.
It's about putting your money where your mouth is, right?
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about their stakeholders. How are they engaging with different stakeholders and responding to their concerns?
They're very proactive. They know that their stakeholders are really important to their success, so they focus on building good relationships.
Who are their main stakeholders?
It's a pretty diverse group, actually. You've got patients, employees, investors, suppliers, the communities where they operate, and government and regulatory bodies.
So a lot of different people to keep happy. How do they engage with all of them?
Well, they use a lot of different channels. They have a dedicated sustainability section on their website with detailed information about their initiatives, their policies, how they're doing. And they use social media to share updates and have conversations about sustainability.
So they're active online. What else are they doing?
They publish annual sustainability reports and other publications to give more in-depth information. They host stakeholder meetings, workshops, and conferences, and they regularly conduct surveys and get feedback through all sorts of channels.
So they're really trying to listen and respond to everyone who is affected by what they do.
Yeah, they're committed to building those relationships and making sure their actions reflect the values and priorities of their stakeholders.
It's all about trust and understanding. Now, let's talk about how they measure and report their sustainability performance. How do they track their progress and let everyone know how they're doing?
They have a really rigorous system. They use all kinds of metrics and indicators to track their progress against their targets.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure. They track environmental metrics like carbon emissions, energy use, water use, waste, and their impact on biodiversity. Social metrics like employee well-being, diversity, human rights, community engagement, and governance metrics like corporate governance practices, ethics, compliance, risk management, things like that.
So it's not just environmental impact. They're looking at the big picture.
Yeah, they want to see everything. They use both quantitative and qualitative data to really understand their performance. They get data from their own operations, their suppliers, and outside organizations.
So they're data-driven.
They have to be. You need good data to make the right decisions and track progress. But it's not enough to just have the data. You have to communicate it effectively. So how do they share their sustainability performance with everyone?
Yeah, how do they do that?
They use a lot of different ways to make sure that information is available. They publish really detailed sustainability reports each year that give a comprehensive overview of their performance, what challenges they're facing, their plans. They've got that sustainability section on their website that they update all the time.
Okay, so they're being transparent. What else are they doing?
They're active on social media, sharing updates and engaging with people about sustainability. They also present at stakeholder meetings and events, and they're proactive in communicating their performance to investors.
So they're covering all the bases.
Transparency is key.
Now, looking at the big picture, what can you tell me about their overall sustainability strategy? What are their top priorities, and how does all of this fit in with the global sustainability agenda?
Well, their strategy is based on their core purpose, which is driving change to defeat serious chronic diseases. And they recognize that to achieve that, they need a holistic approach to sustainability. They have to address environmental, social, and governance issues. They understand that human health is connected to the health of the planet.
So you can't have healthy people without a healthy planet.
Exactly. They have 5 main aspirations that guide their work.
What are those aspirations?
Well, first, they want to drive change in both human and planetary health. So that means reducing their environmental footprint, encouraging healthy lifestyles, and addressing health inequities.
Okay, so improving health for everyone, not just some people.
Right. Second, they want to deliver innovative medicines that really change people's lives and make sure everyone who needs those treatments can get them.
So they're thinking about access and affordability as well as scientific breakthroughs.
Exactly. Third, they need to make sure their supply chain is resilient. That means it can handle disruptions and still get medicines to patients all over the world. Fourth, they want to create a great place to work for their employees, so that means fostering diversity and inclusion and fair labor practices. And finally, they want to operate ethically and responsibly, so that means upholding high standards of corporate governance and engaging with stakeholders transparently.
It sounds like they've got it all covered.
They're pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
And it's not just about checking boxes. These aspirations are aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs.
Right, those are the global goals for sustainable development. Can you give me some concrete examples of how their strategy fits in with the SDGs?
Sure. Their efforts to reduce their environmental footprint contribute to SDG 13, Climate Action, and SDG 15, Life on Land. Their work promoting healthy lifestyles lines up with SDG 3, Good Health and Well-Being. And their work to address health inequities supports SDG 10, Reduced Inequalities.
So they're playing their part in those global efforts to create a more sustainable and equitable world.
They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Now, a sustainability strategy like this big,
Yeah.
is going to have some challenges. What are some of the roadblocks they've encountered?
Well, they're a huge global company operating in a very regulated industry. So implementing those sustainability practices across all their sites and throughout their entire supply chain, that's a challenge.
I can imagine. What else has been tricky?
Collaboration is essential, but it can also be challenging. To reach their goals, they have to work with all sorts of different stakeholders, like suppliers, governments, communities, NGOs, and sometimes things get complicated or delayed.
It's not always easy working with so many different groups.
It's not. And the whole sustainability field is always changing. New technologies, new approaches, so they need to stay informed, be flexible, and embrace innovation.
It's a lot to keep up with. Any other major challenges?
Data management. To measure their performance, they need to collect and analyze tons of data, which can be difficult, especially with a global network of suppliers and partners. You can't have transparency without good data.
So they have their work cut out for them. What are they doing to overcome these challenges? How are they making sure their sustainability initiatives are a success?
They're doing a lot of things. First, they're making sure their governance structure is strong. They've assigned clear rules and responsibilities at every level of the company.
That's so important, right? Someone has to be in charge.
Right. Without good leadership, things can fall apart.
Yeah.
And they're putting a lot of money into technology and innovation.
So new ways to reduce their impact.
Exactly. Renewable energy options, water efficiency, sustainable packaging solutions. They're looking at everything.
Technology can be a powerful tool.
For sure. And they're building partnerships with all those stakeholders we talked about before, suppliers, governments, communities, NGOs.
Because no one can do it alone.
Exactly. And they're always working on how they collect and report data to make sure they're being accurate and transparent about their performance.
Building trust is essential.
It is.
So we've talked about their current initiatives and the challenges. Now, what's the long-term vision? What are their goals for the future of sustainability, for themselves and for the industry as a whole?
They want to be a global leader in sustainability. And not just in the pharmaceutical industry, but across the board.
That's pretty ambitious.
It is. They've set some pretty big targets. For example, they're committed to achieving net zero emissions across their entire value chain by 2045. That's in line with the Paris Agreement, keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius.
That's a huge goal, but really important.
Definitely. And they want to be nature positive by 2045, which means actively contributing to restoring the natural world. They believe that the pharmaceutical industry has to go beyond just minimizing their harm and actually work to heal the planet.
So they're seeing the big picture, the connection between human health and the health of the planet.
Yes. And they're committed to making sure that everyone has access to affordable medicines.
That's so important. Everyone deserves access to healthcare.
Right. It's a basic human right. And they're working to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, one that reflects the diversity of the people they serve.
So they're taking diversity and inclusion seriously, both inside their company and out in the world.
Yes. They're setting a great example for everyone. They're showing that sustainability is a journey, and they're committed to being leaders.
It's inspiring, isn't it, to see a company that's using its resources to make the world a better place.
It really is. They're proving that sustainability and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. They can work together.
And that's a message that every company needs to hear. Now, let's zoom out a little and talk about the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. How do you see the role of sustainability evolving in this sector?
I think there are a few key trends. One is this growing focus on the patient. Understanding that sustainability isn't just about the environment. It's about better outcomes for patients.
Can you explain that a bit more? How does sustainability lead to better outcomes for patients?
Well, it's about developing medicines that are more sustainable, so they don't have as big an impact on the environment. It's about making sure that essential medicines are affordable for everyone, no matter where they live.
So it's about creating the conditions for people to be healthy.
Exactly. Another trend is that companies are moving from just complying with regulations to being leaders in sustainability.
What does that look like? How is that different?
Well, instead of just doing the bare minimum, they're setting ambitious targets, investing in new solutions, and working together to make real change.
So they're taking a more proactive approach.
Yes. And there's a growing focus on data and transparency. Pharma companies are realizing they need good data, they need to analyze it, and they need to be transparent about their performance.
So you can't just say you're sustainable, you have to prove it.
Right. And that transparency helps everyone hold them accountable.
It's about leveling the playing field, right? Everyone has to step up their game. Now, it's important to acknowledge that the pharmaceutical industry still has some work to do. What are some of the biggest challenges they need to overcome?
Their supply chains are incredibly complex. Making sure that everything is ethical and sustainable all along the way is really difficult.
Yeah.
And they need to keep innovating, finding new ways to reduce their impact.
And they have to keep up with new regulations and meet the expectations of their stakeholders, right?
All of that. It's a very dynamic and challenging environment. But the pharmaceutical industry has a chance to be a leader in sustainability.
They have a chance to make a real difference. Now, let's talk about investors. What role are they playing in driving sustainability in this industry?
Investors are becoming more and more influential. They're realizing that sustainability is a big deal, and it can impact a company's financial performance over the long term.
So it's not just a nice to have anymore, it's becoming a core part of business.
Exactly. Investors are incorporating things like environmental, social, and governance factors, ESG, into their investment decisions. They're looking for companies that are managing those risks well.
So investors are starting to ask different questions. It's not just about how much money they'll make, but how that money is being made.
That's it. And this is changing how companies are approaching sustainability. It's not separate anymore. It's part of their business strategy.
So it's not just about shareholders anymore, it's about all stakeholders.
Right.
How are investors making this happen? Are they just choosing to invest in sustainable companies, or are they doing more?
They're using different approaches. Some investors are selling their stock in companies that aren't doing well on sustainability, sending a message that those practices aren't acceptable. Others are working directly with companies, through shareholder resolutions, talking to management, participating in initiatives.
So it's a mix of carrots and sticks, encouraging companies to up their game.
Exactly. And it's working. Companies are responding to investor pressure. They're setting those ambitious targets, being more transparent, and taking real action.
Sounds like everyone wins.
They do. Sustainable companies are usually better managed, more innovative, and better at handling risk. So in the long run, they're more appealing to investors.
So sustainability makes good business sense.
It does. And I think this trend of investors really pushing for sustainability, it's only going to get bigger. Investors are getting smarter about ESG issues, and they expect more from the companies they're putting money into.
It's definitely a force for change. Now, what about consumers? How are they affecting what pharmaceutical companies do when it comes to sustainability?
Consumers are changing. They're paying attention to the impact of the things they buy, and they're making choices that reflect their values.
So they're choosing brands that are aligned with their priorities.
Yeah, and they're willing to pay more for products that are sustainable, and they'll boycott brands that aren't.
So how is that affecting pharmaceutical companies specifically?
They're having to adapt. They're coming up with more sustainable packaging, they're using fewer harmful chemicals in their manufacturing, and they're working to make their supply chains more ethical.
So it's not just about being socially responsible, it's about keeping up with what their customers want.
Exactly. They need to stay competitive, and that means showing consumers that they care about sustainability.
It's about building a brand that people trust and respect. Now, besides consumers and investors, what about governments? What role do they play?
Governments are really important. They're introducing policies and regulations to encourage companies to be more sustainable.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure. Things like carbon pricing are becoming really common. So you've got carbon taxes, cap and trade systems. These basically make it more expensive to pollute.
So it makes financial sense to go green.
Right. And regulations on waste management and pollution are getting tougher, which means pharma companies have to minimize their impact and clean up their act.
It's about protecting the environment and public health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are also some governments that are requiring sustainable packaging for pharmaceuticals.
So using recycled content, biodegradable materials, that kind of thing.
Yeah, trying to get rid of single-use plastics and create a more circular economy. And there's a big focus on transparency. Lots of governments are requiring companies to disclose more information about their sustainability performance, so all the data on emissions, water use, their social impact.
So you have to be able to show that you're doing what you say you're doing.
Exactly. And that transparency helps keep everyone accountable. Consumers, investors, everyone.
So we've looked at everything Novo Nordisk is doing, what pressures they're facing, what they're hoping to achieve. What's your final assessment? How are they doing?
I'm impressed. They're really committed to sustainability. They're showing that you can be a successful business and make a positive difference in the world. And they're not just talking about it, they're doing it.
I agree. They've got this comprehensive approach, ambitious goals, and they're honest about their struggles. They really see sustainability as part of their success.
Their vision for the future is really something. They want to be a leader, set the standard for the whole industry.
Their goals are impressive. Net zero emissions, nature positive, making sure everyone can afford their medicines, a more diverse and inclusive workplace. They're serious about this.
They're showing everyone that sustainability and profit can work together. It's a good lesson for any company.
Absolutely. They're proving that doing good is good business.
And inspiring others to do the same.
It all comes back to that, doesn't it? We all have a part to play.
We do.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive into Novo Nordisk's 2024 annual report. We hope you learned something about the company, their challenges, and what they hope to achieve.
If you'd like to learn more, check out their website, novonordisk.com. You can find the full report, all the details on their sustainability programs, tons of resources.
Stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.